I'm Tom Morello, and you're listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host, Hannah Feldman. David Feldman is still attending to a personal matter, but it wouldn't be a show without a Feldman, so welcome back, Hannah.
Thank you, Steve.
And the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, everybody.
We have a great show today, and some of you may be surprised. We're going to talk about fashion. We're going to spend the whole hour with Dana Thomas, author of Fashionopolis, The Price of Fast Fashion and the Future of Clothes. Fashionopolis lays out the case against fast fashion, its economic, environmental, and human rights devastation. And today we'll speak to her about Fashionopolis Young Readers Edition, which looks at those same themes of fast fashion's impact on the environment and social justice, reimagined as a critical guide for young readers who are starting to make their own fashion choices. As always, somewhere in there, we'll check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, let's talk fashion. Hannah?
Dana Thomas is the European sustainability editor for British Vogue, a regular contributor to the New York Times, and host of The Green Dream, a weekly podcast on sustainability. She's the author of Fashionopolis, The Price of Fast Fashion and the Future of Clothes, and Fashionopolis Young Readers Edition, The Secrets Behind the Clothes We Wear. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Dana Thomas.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me say, Dana, at the outset, this is a spectacular book, and I'm looking at the book she wrote for young readers, which should be for older readers as well. And any teacher in the middle school or high school who doesn't spend some time having the students read this book is missing out on a very, very important part of public education. Let me put it this way about its universal appeal, listeners. If you wear clothes, this book is a must-read. Anybody who doesn't wear clothes may not want to read this book. And so here's how important the textile clothing industry is. I'm taking this from Dana Thomas's book. It's a $3 trillion a year industry around the world. It produces about 100 billion items of clothing annually. We buy 80 billion of them. The remaining 20 billion are destroyed, usually burned or shredded. The average garment is worn 7 times before being thrown away, according to a UK study. Roughly 1 out of every 6 people in the world works in this industry. Shoppers today buy 5 times more clothing than they did in 1980. In 2018, that averaged 68 garments a year. How did shopping for clothing become such an addiction? Why do we buy so many clothes? End quote. I must say, Dana, these figures astonished me. I mean, you're talking with someone who in the last 20 years may have spent a total of $100 a year on clothes, minus 3 pairs of sturdy shoes. I don't know why people buy so many clothes. They buy several T-shirts a year, according to your figures. Why, since 1980, has it been this massive upsurge of people buying clothes?
Well, there's several different reasons. The first is because through marketing by fashion brands, fashion has become shopping, has become a pastime. Like we used to go to the movies, we go play golf, we went to play tennis, now we go shopping. So more people go shopping all the time. At the same time, clothes have never been cheaper than they are today. Now, you say, what do you mean? When I kept hearing this while I was working on the book, I didn't understand what people were saying. And then I read a piece from the New Yorker in 1940 or so. It was a big profile on Hattie Carnegie, the retailer. And she was talking about her clients during the Depression. And she said, I was importing these clothes from Paris, the Paris original luxury clothes from Chanel and Dior, and I was selling them for $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 a piece. And I said to myself, wait a minute, that's the price that we pay for a Chanel dress today. And that was during the Depression, 100 years ago, when the price of eggs was in the cents, not the dollars, right? I started calculating like how much a pound of beef cost then versus today, and then how much a Chanel dress costs then and today. And the Chanel dress was the same price as it was during the Depression, but everything else was a fraction of the price. So clearly, prices of clothes had not gone up in that end, on the luxury end, with inflation. But then she wrote that Raymond Chandler called it the secretary special. It was a line for young women who didn't make a lot of money. And it was, a proper suit and a pretty little day dress that you could wear to the office if you were a secretary or, and she was selling this between $19.99 and $25 during the Depression. And that's the same price you would pay for clothes at Zara or H&M or Uniqlo today.
That's where I want to tell our listeners that you've traveled to all these places, the factories in Bangladesh, the sweatshops in
Absolutely.
Los Angeles, Vietnam, elsewhere. So these lower prices made possible by NAFTA and the
Going
outsourcing
offshore.
effect of these trade agreements, the price is on the workers. Tell us about the conditions in these factories overseas that are producing clothing that used to be produced by factories in New England, factories in North and South Carolina, which are now empty.
Well, they're slowly filling up. But yes, what happened was with the trade agreements during the Reagan era, NAFTA, which came a bit later, but there were others as well, CAFTA, which is the Caribbean version of NAFTA. With these trade agreements, all our manufacturing moved offshore. And they didn't just move offshore because they were looking for better prices. They moved offshore because they were looking for the cheapest price possible. So if they were paying a worker $20 in North Carolina, they were paying a worker 20 cents in Guatemala or Thailand or Vietnam or Bangladesh. Before, they used to have what we call corporate paternalism, where they would do things like give money to the local Little League teams. They put up field lights at the local stadium. They gave donations to the local library. Plus, they paid maternity leave, vacation leave, 40-hour work weeks, benefits, all of that. When they went offshore, they didn't have to pay any of it. No Little League, no benefits, no maternity leave, nothing. So the cost of clothes went, bottomed out. It cost nothing. The factories are a shambles. I visited them in Vietnam. I visited them in Bangladesh. I visited them in China. Some of them were perfectly fine and clean and as they should be, but the most of the time, they were a shambles. 120 degrees, big fans blowing dust around, guys in the jeans factory walking around in waders in 6 inches of dye water on the floor because the drains are chapped. It's just a horror show. And they work nonstop. There are lots of people who argue and say, well, we're creating jobs for people in these places who wouldn't have jobs. They are terrible jobs. They have what we call forced overtime, which basically means you're told to stay longer and work weekends and work nights, and you're not getting paid for it. They just won't let you leave because you're locked in the factory. You're searched when you come in, you're searched when you leave because they're afraid you're going to steal from them. When I went to Bangladesh, they were paying the workers $68 a month. And that was less than half a living wage, which is what economists calculate is what people in Bangladesh need to house, clothe, and feed their families. So basically, you need to work 2 full-time jobs just to meet the basic needs. It's basically corporate colonialism, where we're going into these countries, we're just taking all of their resources, we're making their workers work just one step up from slavery because we pay them a little bit, but they're working in terrible conditions and they're working nonstop to the bone. And if you're pregnant, you're fired. If you get married, you're fired. There's no insurance of any sorts or stability in your job. And why? So we can have cheap clothes that we can burn through and wear 3 or 4 or 5 times and then throw away.
And they get sick. They're toxic substances, particulates
Toxic
in the workplace,
substances,
dangerous
the water
machinery. And the whole factory's
they dump
collapsed.
dyes in the rivers. The rivers die. They're so opaque that, from dyes that, nothing can live in them because sun can't even go through the water. The destruction to the environment is epic. I saw a dead river next to an old jeans factory outside of Ho Chi Minh. And it made me want to, vomit. It was so nasty. It was so nasty. And I thought, this is just one little factory in one little village outside of Ho Chi Minh. There are hundreds of these, there are thousands of these all over the world. We can't solve the climate issue until we solve poverty. We can't solve the poverty issue until we deal with the labor issue. Every story today is a climate story. Every climate story is a labor story.
Listeners, before you hear a series of stories that you cannot fail but remember and relate to your friends and fellow workers, name the brands that are profiting from these dungeon-like factories in Asia and elsewhere, Ethiopia as well. Name the brands and the big stores in the U.S. where people go in and buy.
Well, I mean, many of them are publicly traded companies, so you can even see it in their annual reports. But, H&M is one of the largest producers in Bangladesh and in Myanmar, former Burma. They're still producing there, even though there's been a junta and there's, martial law. They're still producing clothes there. They managed to be working with the bad guys and, who threw out the democratic government. Gap famously has been caught many times producing in pretty sketchy situations, like they were producing in sweatshops in Saipan, which is an American protectorate in the Pacific, and putting made in the USA labels in it and made everybody think that they were made in the USA, like in San Francisco, when it was in Saipan, where they were treating them where they were just sweatshops behind chain link fences with razor tops, and they were paying people pennies, and it was a horror show. So
and Walmart and Target.
Walmart, I know
all
you
these stores.
started at Walmart. And Disney, when the Rana Plaza factory collapsed in Bangladesh, I believe Walmart was one of the brands that was found to be producing there. And all the brands that were found producing there said, not our fault. Our agents on the ground subcontracted that factory. We had no idea.
Before we get into the remarkable reversals of some of these grim stories, mostly by women entrepreneurs, and spectacular ways of producing textiles, recycling textiles, renting textiles, all kinds of ways we're going to talk about. The thing that really was astounding in this book was that Vietnam has a $30 billion a year textile industry, and almost half of it are factories designed to wear down and rub down. It's called distressing denims, so they look torn or worn for sale in the West. Can you describe the distressing process and what it does to the workers, the environment, and how stupid it is?
It certainly is. I mean, my daughter is 21. She's still wearing my jeans from the 80s, those 501 shrink to fits that were stiff as cardboard that we had to break in. They gave you a wedgie for like 6 months. Now you buy them already broken in. So they last a fraction of the time. Mine, the ones she's wearing, I said since the 80s. So they're like 30 years old, right? And they're solid as can be. But if you go out and buy a pair of jeans today, they're already broken in like that. So they last 6 months, then you have to buy more and you have to buy more. It's supposed to be fashionable. And I guess sometimes it kind of looks cool, but I like the hard-earned wear myself. But what they do is they rasp by hand, they sand by hand, they use these machines that kind of sound like a dentist drill, like, all day long. They work on these shorts and jeans. Maybe if they spend 5 or 7 seconds on it, it's a miracle. They just whip through them. They're working at a frantic pace. They got this blue dust from the dye and the fabric flying all over the place. Most of the time, they're not wearing masks. Now, we're all used to wearing masks because of COVID, but I went to visit these factories before COVID where they say wear a mask because of the dust, because you don't want to get all these filaments in your lungs, and then you basically get the fashion equivalent to black lung, right? So they weren't wearing masks. It's 100 degrees or 120 degrees. I mean, I was there in April, not July. And, blisteringly hot, and they're just, wearing out these clothes for you so you don't have to, which is kind of crazy. But then there was this great company that's come out of Valencia, Spain, that does all this work with lasers in clean rooms. And the guys run the machines kind of like video games, like with joysticks. And you put the jeans into this little box and the lasers do all the work and the vacuums suck up all the dust, and it's clean and it's quiet and it's cool and it's air conditioned because the machines would blow up if they got too hot. And it works faster, and the workers are paid more because they're doing much more sophisticated work working with these digital laser machines. So there are solutions to get rid of the sweatshops of people hand sanding your jeans so you don't have to wear them in yourself, but it's not happening fast enough, that's for sure.
But one thing I didn't find in your book, which intrigues me, because you've dealt with the fashion industry, why are hundreds of millions of denims brand new, ready to wear? They go through a process called stonewashing or distressing to wear them down, make them look like they were worn out, split on the knees. What kind of idiot marketing is this? And who started it? And why do consumers put up with it? I saw on a street on Washington, D.C., that they had a model, and they had a pair of denim trousers for women. And there were big holes in the knee level, and it was hundreds of dollars. And I talked to the salesperson. I said, who buys this stuff? He says, we can't sell them fast enough. What's going on here?
It's something that's existed since the 80s. It came out of California. And it's basically that people didn't want to have to break in their jeans themselves, that they wanted them already broken in and you could just slide them on and you look like you've been wearing them for a year and you've just been wearing them for an hour. I mean, it took work to break in your jeans before. It's funny because, blue jeans were the original sustainable garment. They were created from miners during the gold rush in San Francisco and in Northern California, where these guys would crawl around in the dirt and in the rubble all day long. And the reason the rivets were there weren't for decoration. They were to hold the seams together because they were so stressed from crawling around in the earth. And when a miner struck gold, he took his jeans and he gave them to the next guy and said, I hope these bring you good luck. I don't need them anymore. I'm good to go. And he could go back and wearing like nice, clean, normal clothes again, as opposed to these canvas riveting jeans that would withstand anything. And every once in a while, Levi's buys a pair that's been found in a mine in California that date to the 1860s, the 1870s, and they pay for them to have them in their archives. I saw one of these old pairs of jeans, and there's decades of earth. You didn't wash your jeans. You just wore them and wore them and wore them. And then you pass them on the next guy, wore them and they lasted forever. And now we want them all broken in for us. We wash them. We put them in the washing machine, which kills them. It's kind of, it's like they've lost their whole their raison d'etre. They lost their mission. Now they're the least sustainable garment we have.
Well, you also point out that 1 out of 5 clothing items is destroyed or put into landfills before it even reaches the stores.
Yes,
what's the explanation for that?
Well, they call that economies of scale,
We're talking about 20 billion items
20 billion items
destroyed.
Economies of scale, that the business, it's actually cheaper to make 100 and throw away 20 than it is to make 80, which I don't really buy, because you're paying farmers more, you're paying for more water, you're paying for the like the impact of that 20% that you're just chucking. You can't be saving money. You're saving money in column A, but you're losing money in column B. It doesn't make sense.
Who does the chucking?
Everybody does. There was a terrible report that came out of Chile last fall where it was discovered, I don't know how they found it, that fast fashion brands have been dumping those unsold clothes in the Atacama Desert in southern Chile, the driest, most southern desert in the world. And there are dunes and dunes of unsold clothes with price tags still on them. Thousands and thousands of tons of clothes, and they're all made of polyester, which is essentially plastic. So they're just going to be baking in the sun for eternity. Dunes of clothes, unsold, never worn.
We're talking with Dana Thomas, the intrepid peripatetic author of the book Fashionopolis, The Secrets Behind the Clothes We Wear. So let's go through some of these portraits in your book that tell the story, largely, of your book. Who is Sally Fox?
Oh, Sally Fox is this legend in the cotton business. She is what we call the godmother of modern organic cotton. Of course, we had organic cotton for about 6,000 years. That's all we ever had. It's one of the oldest domesticated agriculture products we have. We've been wearing cotton, Caesar was using cotton in his campaigns and in Rome at the Forum. I mean, cotton goes back to the Egyptians. It's been around forever, right? We say Egyptian cotton. But in the last 100 years or so, it's been completely destroyed, I guess you'd say, organic cotton, by big farming, big agriculture, which came up with herbicides and pesticides, of course, to fight the cotton boll, which was the boll weaver, which was a terrible blight on cotton during the 1930s and wiped out the American cotton industry, to be sure. But then, they genetically modified cotton, and then all this genetic engineered cotton that has been now that produces 6 times more per plant than it should. So then you're giving it 6 times more water and 6 times more pesticides and 6 times more this. It's just been manhandled to a point that you can't even recognize what cotton is. It's terrible for the earth. It's terrible for the environment. It's terrible for the people who work it and grow it, because they have to, pick 6 times more cotton. We have too much cotton out there. And now what we call conventional cotton, this manhandled big agriculture cotton, or for 1 kilo of cotton, so 2.2 pounds, you need 1 kilo of chemicals to produce it. And organic cotton requires no chemicals whatsoever. So we want to go back to organic cotton, and Sally Fox has been leading the charge on this for about 30 years. She was doing really well in the late 80s, early 90s, but the conventional cotton farmers fought her and fought her because she was trying to disrupt the way they did business and had done farming for years and decades, and they didn't like it. And it was a woman coming into a man's world. They didn't like that. And they pretty much ran her out of town. But she didn't give up hope, and she kept fighting. And she still is trying to make organic cotton the norm.
Patagonia has gone total organic cotton, haven't they?
But it still only makes up about 1% of all cotton today, which is crazy since it was 100% just a century ago.
Well, when all these pesticides and fungicides and all that stuff is put in clothing, what does it do to your skin when you wear the t-shirt?
Don't you want to know?
When you wear the underwear.
Nobody wants to tell you that, do they? And you're perfectly fine, except that, skin is your largest organ and it's the most porous, right? Same with indigo, synthetic indigo, which has also only existed since about the turn of the century, late 1900s. It has formaldehyde and cyanide in it. I always joke that, in those war movies, when you have the guy with the secret ring and he has the cyanide pill in it, and when he gets caught, he can eat the cyanide pill and then he'll die and the bad guys won't get him. Well, you could just eat your jeans.
Let's talk about organic indigo. Stella McCartney was involved in that, the daughter of Paul McCartney, a remarkable entrepreneur.
Stella, yes. She's wonderful. Absolutely.
Tell us about her.
Stella, of course, is the leader. She's been a real trailblazer in what we call conscious or eco fashion, where she sources organic cotton, she sources natural dyes whenever possible. She's never ever used animal byproducts in her clothing because she was raised a vegetarian. A lot of people sort of poo-pooed her when she started this, but she is the daughter of two of the most famous hippies of all time, right? So this is in her blood. This is the way she was raised. You just didn't hurt animals, and you didn't wear animals, and you didn't eat animals. And so when she got into the luxury fashion business after studying in London at fashion school, she said, I'm not working with leather. And everyone said she was out of her mind. Now they're saying, she might have actually had a point there. And she got rid of, once she proved that she could make her company soar without using leather or fur, then she started tackling other things like PVC, which is a plastic coating on so many things like handbags, your umbrellas, plastic umbrellas. The plastic vinyl is PVC covered. And she's got rid of PVC, including in most of the sequins in her collection. She found some that aren't made of that toxic plastic. I can't pronounce the word. It's like 75 letters with lots of Y's and Z's in it. But the short version is PVC. And she got rid of the PVC sequins and found some biodegradable ones. But, they're only a handful for the moment. But she's supporting and godmothering all these great startups that are doing good works, supporting organic cotton farmers, natural dye makers, people growing silk in labs, people growing leather in labs. And she's using leather, but made of mushroom root systems called mycelium. So she's really great because she was seen as a kook 25 years ago. And now everyone says, actually, she might have had a point.
One of the more fascinating people you describe is Natalie Chanin from Florence, Alabama. After textile plants, after Florence's textiles were emptied by NAFTA, going to Mexico and Central America, she went back to Florence, Alabama. Tell us what she did. It's called reshoring.
Reshoring. So she had been working in the fashion industry for about 20 years and saw the horrors of all that I've been describing. And she was from Florence, Alabama, which is, Muscle Shoals, the home of R&B and Aretha Franklin and the Rolling Stones' Brown Sugar and little Leonard Skinner. And so she decided to get out of the rat race of the New York garment industry and go back to Alabama and start her company where she only uses organic cotton jersey, mostly sourced in the United States, not 100%, but mostly. And she just has everything made to order. Like you go online on her website, you see a picture of something you like, you order it. On a Monday, she calls somebody in. She hires all of these local seamstresses. They make the garment for you, much of it by hand, and then they ship it directly to you. So there's no waste, there's no overproduction because there's no warehouse full of clothes sitting waiting to be sold. There's nothing that ever has to go on sale because there's no leftovers. And it's all organic. It's not cheap, but it's actually the price that you should be paying for clothes. When I was talking earlier about like looking at the price of eggs back in the Depression versus today, and then looking at the price of clothes back in the Depression versus today, her clothes are actually the price you should be paying for clothes. So I bought a organic cotton t-shirt from her, and it cost me, I think, $65 or $70. And you would say, you paid $70 for a cotton t-shirt? This cotton t-shirt was this beautiful, thick cotton. It was natural. It was naturally dyed. It wasn't bleached white. So it was kind of vanilla cotton. The seams were super strong. It was thick. It was soft. It's just the most, and it was grown. They grew the cotton themselves, picked it themselves, spun it in North Carolina, and then brought it back and made the clothes. And I've now had it for 5 years. When I say I wear it 3 times a week, I probably wear it 4 or 5 times a week. I wear it all the time. And that cotton shirt is lasting, like it's going to last me forever. It's so gorgeous. It's so sturdy. It's so soft. And I thought, right, so I've actually gotten my $70 worth, because the $10 t-shirt would have worn out in a couple of months, and I would have had to buy 7 or 8 of those in the time that I've been wearing the same one. And it's going to outlive everything else that's in my closet. I'm sure of it.
You know, you mentioned in your book that a $10 t-shirt, the worker in Bangladesh gets 10 cents of the $10 low-price t-shirt. Let's talk about someone else who is making the mark and starting to go up, Maria Camejo.
Yes, Maria Cornejo. She's in New York City, and she too came out of the rat race of the fashion industry and was just disgusted by what she saw and said, I don't want to work this way, and we don't have to work this way. And I feel like I shouldn't perpetuate all what a lot of people call crimes in the industry, paying workers not even a living wage and then reaping millions. When I went to Bangladesh and the people were earning $68 a month, at the time, the owner of Zara was worth $68 billion. And Zara's sources in Bangladesh. I'm like, right. Well, why is he worth $68 billion? Because he pays those people $68 a month to make the clothes. And he sells them for so much more. Even if they're cheap, he's still making such an enormous markup. He's worth $68 billion. Something's obviously wrong here, right? So Maria Cornejo said, I don't want to be a part of this. And so she started her own company in downtown New York. She makes everything in New York City, a short subway ride or long walk away up in the 30s. And she sells in America. She keeps it really simple. She has one shop in New York. She had one in LA, but I think COVID kind of did that one in, as it did with many businesses. But she's just trucking along doing her thing. She's great. We love Maria Cornejo. Everything is made beautifully. She doesn't overproduce. And it's all made within, a 20-minute radius of the studio.
Well, then there's Sarah Bellows. Sarah Bellows, your clothes are the recipients of what's known as synthetic indigo, which is, shall we say, not very good for the environment or for you.
No.
Along comes Sarah Bellows, and she grows natural indigo. Why don't you describe this remarkable expanding business of hers? It's
fantastic. She does not come through the fashion industry. She came through sort of banking and analysis and finance. And she was like, I don't want to be doing this. And she moved from Washington, D.C. to Nashville, Tennessee, and bought a little farm outside the city and started growing some indigo and a couple other things and making natural dyes. And she was doing it on a very small scale. And then it's grown. And the natural dyes, so it's natural indigo, madder, which gives you a very beautiful sort of cranberry red, Osage, which gives you some beautiful yellows, black walnut, which gives you some sort of mocha chocolates. Indigo was her primary thing because, until I said the late 19th century, we only had natural indigo, and South Carolina was actually the capital of natural indigo in the United States. And it's a really terrific crop because it puts, like soybeans, it's in the soybean, it's in the bean family. It's a legume, so it puts nitrogen back in the soil. So you don't have to dump all this fertilizer in the soil. You just plant indigo, and your fields are good to go again if you rotate around the indigo. Meanwhile, all these farms in that region were planting tobacco, which sucks all the nitrogen out, and corn, which sucks all the nitrogen out. So the soil was broken. And she said, let me come back in and fix your soil by planting indigo, and then I'm going to start making natural indigo dye. And she did, and it's gone so well that she and Levi's have partnered together, and they are rolling out now this summer natural indigo on an industrial level worldwide.
Tell our listeners the reverse, where synthetic indigo is used in Bangladesh factories, a lot of it dumped into the river, 30 miles down, children are drinking water. You want to describe that?
Yes, they absolutely are. The factories that use synthetic indigo, many of these countries, they don't have the same standards that we have, health standards, labor standards, any kind of standards. There's no oversight, even if they did have them. And so there's just direct dumping into rivers and lakes, and kids are swimming in it. They're drinking the water. The rivers die because indigo it's like it's an inky blue. So it goes in the river and it just kills it because it becomes so opaque. The sun can't come through. It's pretty rough. The best thing about, though, better than the environment, better than the social costs, is that when you see a pair of blue jeans dyed with natural indigo, wow, they're just so beautiful, like only nature can do. Nature just makes the most beautiful colors. Think about when you're outside, the colors of flowers, the rainbows, the sky. Natural indigo is like, it's iridescent. When she walked in the room wearing those blue jeans with the natural indigo dye, I was looking at a woman wearing like sapphires. It was just iridescent, a gorgeous, rich cornflower blue. And it made synthetic indigo jeans, rightly so, look dull and flat.
Dana, aren't they growing cotton in different colors now?
Well, not just now. That's we have ever since the dawn of time. Since cotton's been domesticated, we had colored cotton. But it went out of fashion during the Industrial Revolution, which is where I got the name of the book. It's called Fashionopolis because this all goes back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Manchester, which was known as Cottonopolis. And Cottonopolis was because it was where all the cotton was made. And the founders of Cottonopolis wanted white cotton because they were printing it and dyeing it, but mostly printing it, making beautiful chintzes and fabrics for people's homes and for clothes. And you couldn't do that. It was colored. We've had colored cotton since forever. The Incas were using colored cotton. There's a beautiful colored cotton from Hawaii. The Chinese were using colored cotton to make yellow jeans called Nanking pants. It's been around forever. It just, white was more easy to turn into other things than having the colored cotton already. Now there are companies that are realizing that colored cotton is actually an advantage because you don't have to pay for dyeing. And the colors are beautiful.
Well,
the green is sort of a jade color. It's really pretty.
Well, with this book, Fashionopolis, people will learn how to, quote, fight back.
Fight back.
It's called circularity. Circularity. We're going to talk about that. But first, tell us this fascinating story from Mongolia to England about cashmere. I never heard of this, and how it's affecting the decertification process in Mongolia. Why don't you tell us about that?
This is actually one of the great environmental disasters that nobody's really talking about, and I hope to talk more about it. Until a generation ago, until 20, 25 years ago, cashmere was a seriously luxury product. If you knew somebody who had a cashmere sweater, you really took care of it. They cost a lot of money. Do you remember how much a cashmere sweater cost? It was like a serious investment. But part of that was because the cashmere came from Mongolia, and Mongolia was first remote, and secondly, it was a communist and very strictly run government. So they really did manage from top down the cashmere industry and made sure that it wasn't overproduced and there weren't too many goats, and that land management was as it should be. And then it went from a communist structure to a free market capitalist structure. And at the same time that the fashion brands were really going global, everything was going global, and access to Mongolia was becoming easier. And there was the internet where you could do your orders, in the middle of Nowheresville. And they started producing cheap cashmere sweaters at places like Uniqlo and H&M and Zara and Gap, and selling them for, $50, $60 a piece. And they didn't last very long. They last, 3, 4, 5 months, one winter, maybe 2. And then you have to buy another one. And to meet those demands, the cashmere industry started getting more goats. And then more goats meant, goats, one of my favorite lines from when I was working on the book, goats are voracious creatures. They eat everything, and they pull up grass by the roots. So suddenly the cashmere industry was in such a demand that they quadrupled the number of goats in Mongolia on the same amount of land. And they were ripping up all the grass by the roots, and desertification started setting in. It's becoming a desert. And I'm telling you, if the Himalayas become a desert, we're all doomed. So,
and this is projected to turn millions of acres in Mongolia into desert. Is that what you're saying?
That's what's on the books. But there's some nonprofits fighting this and trying to get some regulation in place, and trying to teach the herders to start doing land management, not just go for the money, and trying to get the fast fashion brands to dial back on the amount of cashmere they're ordering, and trying to get the number of goats per acre regulated so that they don't overpopulate the land, and then they don't rip up all the grass, and then there's just dirt, and then there's no rain, and then it's a disaster. And if I'm telling you, if the Himalayas become a desert, all is lost, because the ecosystem there is the most fragile of all, and it really does set the tone for everywhere else. I mean, the ripple effect would be enormous. So all because we just want to have softer sweaters on against our skin.
Well, let's get into the bright side of all this in your book.
Yes,
it's called Circularity.
This sounds like a downer, but it's a book of hope.
Yeah, more than hope, because it puts the hope in people's hands so they can turn hope. Instead of pleading for it, they can turn it into reality. I got to confess something. Over about 30 years ago, I bought several suits from an opportunity store. The average price was $10. They took me through 4 presidential campaigns, and I haven't had to buy a suit since. They're still in good shape. Okay, that's part of circularity. Dana, tell us the different categories of circularity that puts the power in the hands of the people.
Well, first of all, we should never, ever throw away clothes into the trash bin. Like, it just don't do it. Like, you know, if your jeans are worn out, like we used to do, then you cut them off and they become shorts. And then you take the leftovers and you use them for patches. If your t-shirt's worn out, cut it up and use it for rags. Give it at least a second life. If you can give it a third or fourth life, even better. But don't just throw them in the trash. Like, oh, I spilled some wine on it. If you spilled wine on it, over dye it. Like, you know, make the whole thing colored, the color of your wine or your coffee or whatever it is. Repair things. You know, moths went through my sweaters during COVID. They feasted like it was Thanksgiving. And so I just got out a needle and thread and I sewed up the holes, you know, like that's just what we're going to do. And it sounds like I'm being extra thrifty, but I thought, why should I throw something that otherwise is perfectly fine and I can mend it in a way that you can't see and it's perfectly fine again. Circularity is also things like when you buy something and you don't want to wear it anymore, that you take it to a thrift shop, you put it on one of the platforms for resale. Even the brands now are taking things back for resale. Patagonia will take something from anywhere, but particularly if you bought it from Patagonia, but they'll take it from anywhere else too and repair it and resell it.
Tell us about the Patagonia trucks, 2 of them that travel
Patagonia
around
trucks.
the country.
They just drive around
Tell
the
them what
country.
they
And
do.
if you have something that needs repairing, it does not have to be a Patagonia product. But if you have some sort of gear that needs to be repaired, you take it to the truck and they'll fix it for you, which is fantastic. Like, you know, just because you didn't buy it at Patagonia doesn't mean we shouldn't help you repair it and keep it going. Or if you decided that your ski jacket is not suiting you anymore, you're tired of it, or you've outgrown it, then you can take it back to Patagonia. You get a credit to buy something new and they will restore it or renovate it and then put it back on the rack for somebody who wants to buy something at a cheaper price and doesn't necessarily want brand new, but it's in perfectly fine form, reconditioned, you know?
Tell us about consignment stores and renting clothes.
And then renting. Well, renting's really interesting. You know, there's a lot of criticism about renting in America because the biggest company is called Rent the Runway. They're in New Jersey, and they have the largest dry cleaning facility in the world. And those are petroleum products. And so their environmental impact's pretty huge. But the idea of renting things for special occasions, there are plenty of local platforms, and especially here in Europe, where we're smaller cities, but there's local platforms where you can go and rent. I mean, I've heard about brides renting their wedding dresses, which I think is kind of great because you're supposed to have something borrowed and you're only wearing it once. And chances are the person who wore it the last time had a great time too. So it's going to bring you some good energy, some good juju. You can rent for proms, you can rent for parties, you can rent for, I rented a beautiful gown to wear to the Cannes Film Festival. I was like, why should I go out and buy $3,000 dress? I'm only wearing it for one night. I'm going to be Cinderella. And I rented it for $300. And then I returned it and I looked great. And then I didn't have to worry about it again. And it's not sitting in my closet getting dusty. So renting is great. If you can rent, I mean, our boyfriends all rented their prom suits. Why aren't we renting our prom dresses?
But it's growing, according to your book, in the other direction, that people who have a lot of clothes can go to an intermediary and rent the clothes out.
There are many platforms that are about to launch. I keep reading every day about platforms that are about to launch for peer-to-peer renting, where I want to rent something to you or you want to rent something from me. But there's also, you know, reselling at places like the Real and other Vestiaire and other collectives on platforms where you can just put it online, take a picture and put it online and then sell it you've had a pair of shoes that you wore 3 times and you realize that it's what the French call a faux achat, a fake purchase. It wasn't really your thing after all. You thought it was impulse buying, and you can unload it and bring somebody else great joy. So why not? So even on eBay or Etsy, you can clean out your closets, post, resell, and give the clothes a second life. This idea of circularity is this: we've lived in a linear way of consuming since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The birth of the product, the use of the product, the death of the product. Death of the product means goes in the bin. Circularity is we have the birth of the product, the use of the product, the rebirth of the product, the use of the product, the rebirth of the product, the use of the product, and around it goes. And we have recycling where we do that with plastic, we do that with bottles. But with clothes, it's more about keeping the item in circulation, that it's still being worn, it's still being used somehow. Or if it's like too worn out, if the sweater's too worn out, then you take the yarn and unweave it and knit something else. Or if it's an old t-shirt, you cut up and use it in rags. I mean, that's even a bit of circularity. You find other uses for it, or you pass it on to somebody else. I mean, when I was a kid, we had hand-me-downs. That's basically circularity.
And what about consignment shops? Are they spreading?
They are. They're online. They're online, and you can post your items online. You can take a picture and post it, and then you get 50% or a bit more of whatever they manage to sell it for, and off it goes, like on eBay.
Well, here's one for you, listeners. She has a section at the end of the book called "Here's What You Can Do." Launder your clothes less frequently. And can you tell our listeners what you mean by that? And what about using mechanical clothes dryers instead of the old sunshine clothesline in terms of not wearing down clothes?
Well, yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, you should always wash, if you can, wash your clothes on cold or warm. There's no reason to boil them. I mean, really, they'll get clean. And, the hotter you cook them, the shorter the life they will have. And also the dyes wash out, the thread bakes and breaks, and you're just kind of killing them when you boil them. Think about it for a second, like over boiling your broccoli. And so if you wash them in cold, the colors stay fresher and brighter. You're not, cooking them to death. And then if you can, sure, put them out on a line instead of a dryer, you're giving them even a longer life because you're not baking them a second time. And you shouldn't wash your blue jeans as much as we do. The miners never wash their blue jeans. Chip Bergh, the CEO of Levi's, says he never washes his blue jeans. And if he, spills some guacamole on them, he just sort of gets a toothbrush and scrapes it off, which, okay. There might come a point where you feel like your jeans could walk out of the room themselves. Like they got a little too much life going on in them. Then you can put them in the washer, but don't wash them at high levels. Wash them in cold water and wash on the short cycle. You're saving money. You're saving energy. You're saving water on your water bills. You're giving your clothes a longer life. You're creating less runoff and less pollution. It's a win-win.
And you say, pick up a knitting needle yourself. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, take up crafting again. Start working. I mean, my great grandmother used to sit around with her lady friends and do beautiful embroidery work. And I have some of those pieces still in the drawer in the kitchen. We need to work with our hands. We spend so much time on computers and on devices, and working with our hands is in human nature. So my daughter at 21's learned to knit, and she knitted a scarf for her grandmother. It's got a few holes in it, but it's charming. So, pick up a needle and thread. And the beauty, while we don't have home ec classes in schools anymore, you can learn anything on YouTube. I mean, anything. Am I right? Anything. So you can learn how to sew on YouTube. You can learn how to crochet on YouTube. You can learn how to knit on YouTube.
We're talking with Dana Thomas from Paris, France, author of the new book, Fashionopolis Young Readers Edition, but it's great for adults too. Very clear, easy to read. The secrets behind the clothes we wear. I know what someone's thinking now. They just heard you about knitting. They're saying, how can I knit and hold on to my cell phone at the same time?
That's it. Well, maybe you need to put the cell phone down a little bit. It takes two hands to knit, that's to be sure.
I want to conclude by asking you to give a detailed description of the sweatshops in Los Angeles that you personally visited more than once, because Steve is from Los Angeles and he's going to do something about it.
Well, Steve, the good news is that wonderful governor that you did not recall signed legislation to help put those sweatshops out of business last fall.
All right, my work is done here.
With the garment workers legislation. But I went to visit these sweatshops. They're in downtown LA. They're in plain sight. I mean, if you're walking down Los Angeles Street, you'll hear sewing machines and you go like, what's going on there? You go into the Bendix building, this beautiful old deco building from 1927, 28. And you will be going to because it's where there's some dance studios and some art galleries. You could be going to an art gallery opening and you walk past these rooms where you see like people hunched over sewing machines in bad light with piles of clothes on the floor. And you go, what's that about? It's a sweatshop. And they're clandestine. They pay the workers $2 an hour instead of the state minimum wage, which I think is just about up to $15 an hour now, right? It's working its way up to that. They don't even pay the federal minimum wage of $7.50. And they're subcontracting. And whenever the labor department swoops in and busts them for these places, the brands that get busted there say, oh, we had no idea, we did it, our contractor subcontracted. Now, I can understand if you say that if you're producing in Bangladesh and you've lost track of your supply chain, but if you are an LA-based company and you don't know where your clothes are being made and your headquarters is just down the street, then you are not running your business very well. Am I right? So, I mean, come on. So the California State Assembly just passed a law and the governor signed it, saying that if you get busted now in a factory in LA where they're paying their workers to what they call wage theft, you're paying them $2 an hour instead of $15, then the brand is responsible for the difference, that $13 an hour difference, and they have to pay the difference. So that means that they're going to be a little bit more diligent about where their clothes are being made, and they're not going to lose their supply chain. And hopefully they'll start hiring the workers at the state wage and give them the benefits that they deserve, as opposed to these slave wages. And
the brand is another word for the chain retail stores or the individual retail clothing stores.
Absolutely. So like Forever 21, Ross for Less, all those LA companies that, there have been reports, you just Google fashion busts and they'll pop up in the LA Times, the names of the companies that were busted doing this. The Department of Labor under Obama particularly went after this a lot. And they got in a lot of trouble, but they just kept sloughing it off. They can't slough it off anymore.
Steve, what's your reaction here? This is where you live.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, I don't have to actually go in and bust these places myself now.
Yeah.
Because Ralph would make me do that as I'm here. You always get an assignment from Ralph. I have a different question. We have done a number of shows on the burgeoning or the re-burgeoning industry of industrial hemp.
Yes.
What is the role of industrial hemp in all of this? Is it positive? Is it negative?
It's positive. It's very small. It's very small still. Even wool is very small. Wool only makes up 1% of all the textiles made today. The largest amount of, the biggest fabric we have is polyester, which is a petroleum-based fabric that was invented during the 1930s and early 40s during the war at DuPont and in England, as a replacement for silk, which during the war was being used for parachutes and for thread for wounds. And so, they needed silk for the war effort. So it seemed like a great idea at the time, but it just never occurred to anyone that basically these clothes were made of plastic and the plastic never biodegrades. And that we had to drill in the earth to get more petroleum to make more polyester. 66 or 65% of all of our clothes today, 2/3, have some polyester in them. And that's just a disaster on so many different levels.
Dana, why isn't industrial hemp, now it's legal in the United States?
Yes, it is.
It's been legal in France. And why isn't it expanding more rapidly?
Well, I think because there were so many laws banning it for a while. And because I think there is a bit of, because of the pressure of these companies, the oil companies, the petroleum companies, who want you to keep having polyester. I mean, I get emails from the supposedly watchdog groups saying wool is a terrible fabric, you should never use wool. And then I find out that the campaign's being led by their shell companies for the petroleum industry, and the fast fashion industry wants to keep using polyester because it's so cheap and they make so much money. So there's a lot of lobbying, not against hemp, but just for the stuff that is cheap and toxic, like always.
What's been the industry's response to your book?
Oh, it's been great. It's been great. Except, maybe a couple of the fast fashion companies aren't big fans of mine, though I've been told that the head of Zara thinks it's great and he thinks I'm great. So that's kind of nice. But, if they aren't happy about it, it just means it's because I've told truths about them that they'd rather have kept quiet. If they got
And
something to hide, then they're unhappy, right?
Have any teachers adopted this book, the Young Readers Edition?
Yes, and in fact, one school in England sent me a note. They made a board game out of it. It's really adorable. When they had to do some sort of project, and one kid came up with a board game like, "Oh, you've landed in a sweatshop factory. Lose 3 turns." Really,
That's
really
wonderful.
Charming. I mean, sad.
Anna, do you
charming.
have a comment?
I love the board game idea. So in that similar vein, Ralph has been really vocal about, the commercialization of childhood, and kids' impressionable minds are targeted by marketing. And
yes,
I'm curious, middle readers, like when you're in middle school, late elementary school, early high school, I remember that's when I first had disposable income.
That's it.
And that's also when I remember getting outraged. I remember learning about where the gelatin in my gummy bears came from. And,
right.
And how dare these grownups try to trick me into eating this thing that's disgusting. So I'm curious what, reissuing this book with middle readers in mind, were there any choices you made with that intention of trying to get that age cohort, get their attention?
Well, basically, the idea is that if they, it's really hard to break a habit of any sort, right? So if I wrote this book I wrote the adult version, and it's for 35-year-olds who are like, yeah, but I really want to get a new dress for Friday night. And I can only afford H&M. So off they go, right? It's really hard to break a habit that's been, the way you've lived for 10, 15, 20 years. But if you've never developed the habit, then maybe you'll never start. So the idea with this book is to lay it out for kids, so maybe they'll never step foot into those stores and start spending their money on them. Because those stores, fast fashion really does cater to the sort of 14 to 22-year-olds particularly, right? Because it's in their babysitting income range, or their flipping burgers range. And the idea is for them to realize that what the impact is of those purchases, and make them really think about what they're buying when they buy these things. And I'm really hoping that, I know we'll never get rid of fast fashion, like we could never get rid of fast food, right? But before a book like The Omnivore's Dilemma or Fast Food Nation came out, there was you had fast food or you had fancy food, and there was not a lot of in between. And now you have vegan fast food, and McDonald's serves salad. So what did it bring you? Choice. You have Whole Foods, right? You have grocery stores that sell organic, but organic isn't just for the uber rich. I'm hoping that we can do the same with fashion, where, okay, maybe there'll still be H&M and Zara and Gap and Uniqlo and all these other fast fashion brands selling you all these polyester clothes, but that their market share will go down because there's competition coming up by companies that are in the same price range, but selling you the same things with organic cotton, with no polyester, with hemp, with, wool instead of acetate, and all these, back to giving you choice. And if we have choice, then we'll have less impact of the negative and more positive impact.
Dana, before we go, tell us about your podcast.
Oh, yes. I've just started a podcast called The Green Dream with Dana Thomas, and it's about all things sustainable. And it's really like, when I say all things, the first episode was with the children's book author, Oliver Jeffers. The second one is with the documentary film director, Eva Orner, about her movie Burning, about the Australian fires. It's really about arts, culture, fashion. We're going to have somebody on talking about electric vehicles and why they're so ugly. So it's about just understanding how you can green up your life. And I hope you'll listen.
Don't forget the masochistic 3-inch spike heel while you're at it.
Yes, of course.
I would recommend Ralph as a guest to tell you his secrets of buying things and holding on to them forever.
Absolutely.
Through presidential campaigns. There may be some tips there.
With great pleasure.
I can't tell you, the best thing that ever happened to me was breaking my foot. I've not worn a high heel since.
That's it.
And I have an excuse.
That's it. Well, I hope you'll tune into The Green Dream. It's on all wherever you get your podcasts, The Green Dream with Dana Thomas.
On that note, we've been talking with Dana Thomas from Paris, France, the author of the brand new book, Fashionopolis, The Secrets Behind the Clothes We Wear, published by Dial Books in New York and available to parents and teachers everywhere. I can't imagine anybody in middle school and high school who would not be fascinated with having this book in their classroom. Thank you very much, Dana.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
We've been speaking with Dana Thomas. We will link to her book, Fashionopolis, and her podcast, The Green Dream, at ralphnaderradiohour.com. Now let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, April 22, 2022. I'm Russell Mokhiber. While millions of California families struggled financially in 2021, Pacific Gas and Electric CEO made over $50 million for leading the utility with a history of bad investments and punitive energy bills. At the same time that CEO, Patricia Poppe, was raking in the money through direct compensation, the company triggered the second largest wildfire in California history, estimated cost more than $1 billion in damages, much of it from homes and entire communities burned to the ground. Most of Poppe's compensation came from $41.2 million in stock awards, as well as a bonus of $6.6 million and an annual salary of $1.3 million. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scroven, along with Hannah Feldman and Ralph, and that's our show. I want to thank our guest again, Dana Thomas. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up. A transcript of the show will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website soon after the episode is posted.
To order your copy of the pilot issue of the Capitol Hill Citizen, it's just $5. Go to capitolhillcitizen.com. The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Leeward and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer is Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon. Our associate producer is Hannah Feldman. Our social media manager is Stephen Wendt. Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Great advice on your clothing wardrobe. Thank you, Dana Thomas.
Hi, this is Jimmy Leeward, producer of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, and welcome to the wrap-up where Steve asks another question of Dana Thomas.
I just wanted, before we let you go, I just wanted to ask you one more question. I bought a lot of Christmas gifts, a few Christmas gifts this year from a Canadian company called 10 Tree.
Oh, yeah, they're great.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, because apparently you buy something, Ralph, from them, and they plant 10 trees with every purchase. So I guess, Dana, I was asking, is that really a good thing? Did they follow through? Is that?
Yes. And there are other companies that do that too. It's really terrific. You know, the savior to much of our issues and our woes with climate change is planting trees. And the more that we plant, the more carbon we'll be able to absorb from the atmosphere, the faster we'll be able to slow down the carbon.
Where do they plant the trees?
All over. So plant a tree and nurture trees.
They send you like a receipt, Ralph, where they say, okay, here.
And you can watch it grow online.
Yeah. You can kind of track your trees.
You can track your trees. I know a company also that does the same thing with sheep. It's called Sheep Inc. in England. When you buy the sweater, they tell you from which sheep the wool came from, and you can watch your sheep online in New Zealand. You can follow the life of your sheep, and know its name and everything. Kind of adorable.
And that's a wrap. Join us next week when we welcome back political commentator from the Brookings Institute, E.J. Dionne. Until next time.
Stand up, you've been sitting way